15 minutes behind the schedule, so let's continue.
Anyways, hello everybody. My name is Filippi. I've been working in professional basketball most of my adult life. I started out as a sports journalist, worked briefly as a sports agent, and for 20 years I've been an international scout, working primarily but not exclusively for NBA teams. Like I said, it's been an incredible ride so far. Very lucky to be able to do something that I like, something that's so dynamic and so exciting. What I wanted to talk about today is, like I said, what is scouting more in detail, and what, as a pro scout, I look at when I am observing, players. Specifically young players, but just players in general, because at this point I scout both young players that are 16, 17, 18, as well as older players according to the needs of the team that I'm working for in that moment. Scouting, like I said, it's very hard to describe outside of the United States. In the United States, scouting is something that is done in all professional sports, be it football, basketball, baseball. Whereas in Europe, outside of the USA in general, it's more of a vague concept. This, both due to cultural differences and also, budgetary reasons. Whereas an NBA team or an NFL team, has, tens of thousands of dollars to pour into this endeavor. Maybe European teams or smaller market teams, don't have those possibilities. But nonetheless, scouting in some form could be very useful to any type of sports team, specifically basketball, even if it's, just a minor league team or, just a small pro team in a non-traditional basketball country. People ask me, what do I look for when I'm scouting a player? A lot of different things. And certain things are pretty common in general, regardless of whether I'm looking at a young player or a veteran player. Certain things that are more specific to looking at young players. In general, what do I look at when I'm evaluating a player? First things, obvious things are physical characteristics. Personally, I like to go to the arena at least 1 hour before the game, because first of all, this that may be the only time that I have the possibility to get up close to the player, because maybe the tickets I have won't be courtside, or maybe in the big arena, nobody sits close to the court anyways, but an hour before the game, nobody will mind if I walk down to the court, so I can really look at a player up close, because sometimes a player's listed at 6'8" or 2 meters 3, and I look at him, I walk up close to him, and he says, it's not that tall, these are small things, but it's very important, because if you don't know a player well, especially as a young player, these are very important things to know. So for physical characteristics, the very first thing. Physical characteristics, his body type, the type of body frame he has, if he's very skinny, if he has long arms. I have to ask questions to myself. He's very skinny, yes, but he's only 17. What are the chances that he will put on, add a lot of muscle? If he's young, it's optimistic to think that he's going to get bigger and stronger with age. But if he has a very narrow frame, something that I must take into consideration is that even though he'll probably get more muscle as he gets older, if he has a very narrow, skinny body, his frame won't be able to support too much added weight or muscle to begin with. So, that may be a limitation. Something else that I have to look at, is, with young players specifically, regarding their body type, is, you may find, a 17-year-old, 16, 17-year-old guy who's big, strong, and he looks like a man. That means, though, that he's probably finished growing, that his body's not going to change much anymore. So, that's an important thing to consider. Maybe another player, same age, though, he's very skinny, got a baby face, doesn't have hair on his body. It's legitimate, to be optimistic and, expect that this young man's going to probably get much stronger. First of all, he probably will grow a couple more inches, which is, some never late growth spurt. This is something that, I have to consider when I'm doing my work. Arm length, wingspan, that's a huge factor, at least specifically for professional basketball, in my opinion. Nowadays, it's not so important how tall you are for your position, but how long your arms are. There are a lot of centers or power forwards that may be a little bit shorter than average, but if they have very long arms, that will help compensate, because it's not how high your neck and your head is, it's how high your reach is that's important. If you're 6'7", and you're guarding a 6'10" guy, and you have very long arms, those 2-3 inches is not much of an issue. Whereas, if you did not have long arms, you would have to probably be a comparable height to compete with said player. It's very important to compare also, to evaluate the athleticism of a player, especially looking for an NBA team. This is one of the things that is trickiest, because on average, a player that may seem very athletic here in Europe may just be average, for the NBA level. So that's a very important thing to take into consideration. Sometimes a guy is a great leaper, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's very fast. This is something that I've learned, over time. People think, oh, athleticism, it means jumping. Not just jumping. There's some guys who are not great leapers, but I would consider them to be good athletes because they have quick reflexes. They're quick off their feet. They're always a step ahead of, the competition because they have great, timing. That's, something that's very important. And once again, it's something that you'll only learn by observing through time. I mentioned before, I like to go to the game early. Another thing I learned is that who comes out early to put in some extra work? Teams usually come out about 40 minutes before tip-off when they go back into the locker room, and then they'll come back out again. It's always interesting to see who's out there an hour before the game, maybe on his own. Obviously, if a guy's not out there early, that's not necessarily a negative, but I will put my report if an hour before the game, the player that I'm interested in is already out there, perhaps even alone, getting in some extra shots. That's definitely a plus. It's definitely a plus, something that, I would put good, emphasis on. In warm-ups, I always like to look how engaged, how focused, how concentrated a player is. Sometimes guys go out there early, but they spend half the time just, shooting around randomly, talking to people, going to say hi to their friends, to their family that's in the stands. Okay, that's understandable, but 30 minutes before the game, you have to be locked in. That's definitely, something that is very important, in my opinion. Ultimately, though, when I'm evaluating players' physical traits, I have to evaluate relative to their position and the level of competition. I mentioned before, athleticism at the NBA level is very different than athleticism at, a European basketball level. Same thing said for height. A guy, a 6'3" shooting guard may work in the minor leagues, but in the EuroLeague, the shooting guard probably has to be a little bigger. In the NBA, for sure, much bigger. So once again, players, size, athleticism is all relative to both his position and the level of competition. Showing big men, athleticism is less a factor than it is for guards and wing players. For tall players, it's more maybe their wingspan and strength, whereas for guards, it's more the quickness and athleticism that's a factor. I try to evaluate a player's strengths and weaknesses on both offense and defense. My scouting reports are, very long. I look at as many aspects as possible. Obviously, if a player doesn't play much, it's a different story. But hopefully, I'll get to see a player enough times to, be able to pinpoint his strengths and weaknesses, his skills, what he does well. What do I look at specifically, though? First of all, obviously, his shot, regardless of position. Is his shot form very fluid? If he's not a good shooter, do I think that he can improve his shot? Is it maybe just a question of his mechanics? That he just needs to maybe, add a little more backspin to his shot, perhaps? Or is really, his mechanics are terrible and he really needs to start from scratch, start from zero? Like I said, with young players, this is, obviously a major factor. A pro player, even if his shot isn't perfect, if he's made it to a pro level, that probably means that his shot, is good enough as is. It's probably not a good idea to change it anymore. Whereas with a young player, you still have time to try to teach him, a new technique, maybe to hold the ball in a different way. It's very useful to keep a shot chart during games to kind of, get an idea of where the player likes to shoot from most. That way I, once again, can, understand his strengths and weaknesses better. I may notice over time that a player, he likes to go to the basket one-on-one, but he only can do it from the right side rather than the left side. These are small details that, when you're evaluating a player, the higher the level of competition, the more important it is to be able to be very analytical on things like this. Can he create his own shot? This is especially, crucial for guards and wing players, obviously. A guy may be a great shooter, but if he can't create his own shot, it will be a limitation. More often than not, someone who's very good at creating his own shot and going one-on-one at the junior level, that doesn't necessarily mean that he'll be able to do the same at a higher level of competition. Maybe because, he's not as, playing against 18-year-olds, he's stronger than, other kids his age, but when he goes to professional level, other guys will be just as strong and maybe taller. So once again, can he create his own shots? Yes or no, but also, will he be able to do the same against a higher level of competition? There's a lot of projecting, a lot of predicting. It's not an exact science, but experience, at least for me, definitely helps being able to, kind of see what will work and what won't. I talk about in players, strengths and weaknesses. A question I have to ask myself, so is that strength going to translate or not to higher levels of competition? The same for a weakness, though, is this weakness something that he can improve on? A player's body, probably. If a player's not strong physically, a big, tall kid is not strong physically, you can hope that going to the weight room and just maturing physically, he will get stronger. If a player's not a good shooter, like I said, if he's still young, there's good hope that if he works on his shot, that he'll become a better shooter. When I worked for the Portland Trailblazers, we drafted Rudy Fernandez out of Spain from Badalona. When he was 16, 17, he was everything except a shooter. He was obviously extremely talented. He was a pro player at age 17, but he was all his scoring was on penetration, one-on-one, in transition. He was not a good shooter. He didn't even shoot much from three-point range. By the time he went to the NBA, he pretty much became only a three-point shooter. And now upon his return to Europe, he's playing mostly now just as, a three-point shooter. His game has totally changed from when I first scouted him. Getting back to specific characteristics that I look at. So shooting range, there's more and more emphasis on the three-point shot. So for big men, it's an added plus now if they have shooting range. Not necessarily shooting three-pointers, but being able to at least step back to face up and catch the ball, 4 or 5 meters from the basket, and to be able to make a shot, to knock down a high post shot. There's so much talk about stretch big men, spread forwards or stretch big men. In today's game, that's, a fundamental characteristic, so I have to look at that. Sometimes, specifically with big men, in the game, he may not play away from the basket, but in warm-ups, for instance, or if I go see a practice, it'll be very interesting to watch how he shoots the ball, because there are many cases, I've encountered many cases of guys that did not look like very good shooters because their coach didn't want them to shoot from outside because they didn't need to. They wanted them close to the basket, but I later found out that they actually had a very good shooting touch. And, if my team was interested in a player with those characteristics, then that's the type of, big man that we would be looking at. I would tell my boss, he said, Jason, but yeah, this guy's a good inside scorer, but he doesn't shoot from the outside. I said, trust me, coach, it's just the system his team uses. They use a traditional center, but he can play away from the basket also. I've seen him practice. In warm-ups, if you look at him, he shoots, very well. He's a very good free throw shooter, for instance. That's, very underestimated skill for big men. And another thing, very important, is to try to predict what type of player the player's going to be at for your team or at a higher level of competition. Working for an NBA team, when you sign a player, it's a big financial investment. My boss needs to know what I think he's going to be. Is he going to be a star player? Is he going to be a starter? Is he going to be just, or is he going to be a rotation player? Is he just going to be a guy who's good enough to make the roster? Is he just going to be a practice player? This will obviously influence, what the team will offer him, what type of contract they will offer him, if they're going to sign him to a 1-year deal or a 3-year deal. Really depending if they think he's going to be able to at least play rotation. He obviously has a different value than a guy who's, we'll just bring him in to be the third center. That's a totally different scenario. This may be more specific to the NBA than it is for Europe, but I think the higher the level of competition, the more there is specialization now. I've always been asked, at least working for NBA teams, what is the guy's special skill, And that's not always easy when you're evaluating a young player, because once again, young players, their game is, they're just like their body, is still a work in progress. And once again, a guy that does everything at the junior level, he may not be able to do the same at the pro level. My job is to see if he has a special NBA skill, special skill, regardless of the level of competition. EuroLeague team, need to evaluate what can he do for us. It's very important for me to have input for the team I'm working for. Like I said, I've worked most of my career for NBA teams, but I've also done consulting work for many European teams over the years, sometimes formally, sometimes just as a favor. And the input they give me, what they're looking for, is crucial. Obviously, I know the player market well, so at least I have an idea of who I should look at and evaluate for them and recommend to them. But it's, like I said, that's very important to, say, like I said, what does he do? If he can do one thing that can help the team, what is it? Maybe it's shooting, maybe it's creating for others, maybe it's rebounding, maybe it's being a rim protector, maybe it's being a physical presence on defense. Knowing what that special thing is crucial, and when you have to decide on signing a player to a long-term contract, making an investment, to bring him to your team. It's like I said, and once again, many different aspects. Sometimes he can just be an energy guy off the bench. Just kind of imagine a role for him. That's very important. I can't stress how important that is. Being able to compare him to a well-known veteran player is also crucial, because it's going to help you present the player to your team better, and it's going to give the coach, the general manager, whoever has to make the final decision on whether to sign a player or not, give them an idea of what they're giving. If you can compare that player to a well-known NBA player, or even at a lower level to a player that coach knows well, to a player that's currently on the team, say, you know, coach, he's a younger version of our, you know, starting, you know, center, or he's a younger version with a better shot of our point guard. That's really helpful. Like I said, when I'm doing a game, I may not be thinking about that, but after the game, when I'm completing my report, my final overview of the game, of the player, I will try to include these things, you know, where I think this player is going to be in 2 or 3 years, and whether or not I think he can help our team, whether or not I think he's appropriate for the team that I'm working for, consulting for in that moment. I talked about, I have to ask myself why I think a player will succeed or why he will fail. Just kind of imagine a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. I know this sounds very simplistic and obvious, but sometimes people don't make these, you know, assumptions and then mistakes are made. I mean, you need to know what a player, you know, can do for you, and you need to know the risks involved. You know, with, you know, if he doesn't become as good as we thought, will he at least be useful in practice? Will he at least contribute on the defensive end? Things like this are all very important. Over time, I've focused a lot on intangibles. What are intangibles? Intangibles are things that, you know, just that you don't initially see first, things that are not specific necessarily to basketball, like shooting or passing, but, you know, kind of trying to read a player's, you know, behavior, his body language is a fundamental thing. Those, like I said, when I first started this job, I didn't give enough importance to small things like body language, but over time I learned that that's very important. Often, the first time I see a player, that may not be the thing I focus on, obviously. I need to learn the players, you know, to have a good idea of his physical attributes, of his strengths on offense and defense. But when I see him multiple times, these are things that I need to start focusing on, because ultimately they will factor in to making any decision about scouting, about signing the player or not. So what are these intangibles? Well, body language is probably the biggest. Body language can be expressed in many different ways. Some are very subtle. Some, like I said, sometimes I follow a player and observe him. If there aren't many other interesting players in the game, I will look at a player even when he's on the bench, how he interacts with his teammates. You know, some guys, when they're on the bench, they're cheering for their teammates as if they're on the court. Other guys, if they're not on the court, they don't care what's happening. They just sit there and rest and really don't care about what's going on. These are, you know, these are things to take into consideration. I look, you know, if a guy is complaining with the refs a lot, if a guy is supportive to a teammate, you know, if a teammate makes a good play, is that player the first one that goes to congratulate him? More importantly, if a teammate makes a mistake, is that same guy the first one to go to comfort him and say, hey, it's okay, you'll make the next shot? You know, these are small things, but, you know, any coach will tell you that, you know, to create a winning mentality, a winning atmosphere, to have that special team chemistry, guys need to both want to win, but also to have that, you know, teamwork feeling. It's, like I said, it's chemistry, but it's something that, you know, you can't take for granted. So if I see a guy who's, you know, being supportive to his teammates, that's obviously a plus. Whereas more often than not, you may see a player who, when a teammate makes a mistake, even though he won't say anything, you can just see that, you know, he has contempt towards his teammate. He's like, oh man, you know, oh, I'm not gonna give that guy the ball again. You know, rather than encouraging him and saying, hey, you'll make the next shot. Once again, these are things that you may not focus on initially, but if you are looking to sign a player, the next time you go see him, that's something you should look at, you know, just these small things like that. You know, looking at the player's, you know, energy level. Is the player out of shape? That's especially crucial with young guys. I mean, if you're not full of energy and running hard when you're 17, that's, you know, that's a problem. It's mean, it's like, wait, if you're not in shape when you're 17, I mean, when are you ever going to be in shape? So just, you know, the energy level of a player, is he, in good shape or not? You can see this in practices more than in games. Kind of, the effort level. If a player is lazy, sometimes in practice guys, don't go as hard as they do in games. I want a player who gives 110% every time he's on the court, even if it's in a practice. Even if his team is up or down by 25 points, that's not important. It's not like, oh, okay, we're up by 20, I can relax. I want a guy that's giving 110% on principle. He only has one speed, and that's giving 110%. I know it's a cliche, but it's true. And once again, this is contagious. Any coach will tell you this, that, if most of your guys, especially your top guys, are working hard, everybody's going to follow suit. Whereas if, some of your most important players are kind of slacking off because they're tired, because they're up by 20 and down by 20, everybody else is going to follow suit. It's human nature. It's human nature. So, looking for players that have positive, aggressive mentality, always giving 110%, is something that is very important. Once again, it's the first time you see a guy, that may not be the first thing you notice, but in my opinion, when you see a guy multiple times, those are things that you need to be able to evaluate. And like I said, for me, if a guy doesn't play with good energy, doesn't play hard, that's a huge turnoff. No matter how talented he is, he's going to lose points in my eyes. Whereas a player who's maybe less talented, maybe a couple centimeters shorter, but his energy level is very high, that's the type of player that I want for my team if I think he's good enough to play at our level. Selfish play. That's another huge factor. Selfish play can be different things. Obviously, literally, a player who only looks to shoot, doesn't look to pass. Even if a teammate is open, he'll take the shot as soon as he gets the ball. That's the most obvious aspect. But just selfish play in general. Some guys you can see that they only care about their stats. They get fired up when they score. But if a teammate scores, they don't care. They're like, whatever, okay. These are things to take into account because if you want to create a winning atmosphere, a winning culture, these are the things that make a difference. Just being disrespectful in general, is towards anybody, be it the referees, complaining with the referees, arguing with the coach after being substituted or after making a mistake, arguing with a teammate. All these things are things that, I have to evaluate in some way, positive or negative. They're not just, oh, it happens. When you see a player multiple times and you see that this is a pattern, a trend, then you kind of know, that player, is that way. Sure, anybody can get nervous on a given play, on a given day, but when you see this over time, obviously that's an indicator that things, go a certain way. Scouting is, obviously evaluating players. It's also a lot of predicting in general, especially the young players. With an older player, a veteran player, you pretty much know what he's going to give you. He's a finished product. Okay, we need a rebounder, we need a shooter, we need a point guard. You know that player can give that to you. So really the only question you have to ask is that player right for your culture, for your team style of play? Will he, help your team improve? With young players, so many factors, though, can change your initial impression. You go see, a guy who's 17, 18, he may be dominant at that stage of his career simply because, his body developed earlier than others, so he has a physical advantage over others. But once everybody else grows up, or once he's going to play grown men like himself, suddenly he may not be as dominant as he was. Whereas a player, as I said before, who still kind of very skinny, baby face, doesn't have area on his body, he's going to grow a couple inches. He's going to get much stronger. You know, at age 17, maybe he's not the best player on his junior team, but 2 years later, he's much better than the guy that he was backing up 2 years ago. So many other things can influence the development of a young player. Some may be relative to basketball, some may be non-relative to basketball. Maybe off-court issues, which I'll discuss more in detail later. Maybe distractions. So young guys, they may want to go out. They have their first girlfriends, stuff like that. These are all not necessarily bad things, but once again, they can, affect the players. They can distract the player. They can affect his concentration in practice. They can affect his effort. So, like I said, a player who is very promising at age 16, 17, there's no guarantee that he's going to live up to expectations. Whereas a player, who may not be as good at the same age, in 2-3 years though, his body develops, he becomes more confident. There's just so many, small factors that you have to take into consideration that you can't predict, before. These are things, that it's not an exact science. But like I said, with experience, and the more you see a player, the more information you gather, and the better you'll be able to kind of predict and project the player's development. I always ask myself when I see a young player, okay, this is what he is now, but what is he going to be in 2 or 3 years? Is he going to be playing the same position? Sometimes a kid's, he plays power forward when he's 16, but he expands his, face-up game and becomes a small forward. Maybe the shooting guard, the 6'3" shooting guard is a little small for his position, so he develops his playmaking more and becomes a point guard, at the pro level. I need to be able to kind of predict and project how he's going to develop and where I see him in 2 or 3 years. I can give you some personal examples. When I was working for Portland, Nicholas Batum was one of the most important players that my team drafted when I was working for them. And I say this because in Portland we drafted a lot of international players, but Nicholas Batum was the one guy who was kind of my guy. Guys like Rudy Fernandez, Sergio Rodriguez, I didn't have to convince my boss to pick him because they already knew him from, international play, and it was a no-brainer. Nicholas Batum, even though he has become an outstanding player, started in the NBA, when we drafted him out of Le Mans, he was averaging 8 points a game. He was considered a great talent, he was considered a first-round prospect, but not a sure thing. Even I wasn't sure that he'd become a starter. I just knew that he was going to be better in the NBA than he was in Europe. And in fact, he went from being a backup, averaging 8 points a game with Le Mans, to being a starter pretty much, after 1 month into his rookie season for us in Portland. And once again, obviously, I wasn't sure about that, but I had a good feeling. But I had to convince my boss. I had him down as a lottery pick. We got him at number 24 or 25, I don't remember exactly. We got him in the late first round, which for me was a steal, though, because I had him down as a lottery pick. I thought then, Batum, I was talking about how players change over time. I first saw Nicholas Batum when he was 15 years old at Basketball Without Borders in Treviso. And he was this scrawny, baby-faced kid. And the only reason I even took notes on him was that he was playing with kids that were 3, 4 years older than him. But he was a baby, literally. Fast forward 3 years later, at the Mannheim Junior Tournament, and again that summer at the European Junior Championships in Greece, and I don't even recognize him. He grew like 5 centimeters, 3 inches, so about 8 centimeters over 3 years. He had a late growth spurt. And though he was still skinny, like I said, you could see that he had a nice frame in his confidence level would change. When I saw him at basketball borders, he was this scared little kid playing with, men, or at least men compared to him. But in that tournament, he was, just like a really different person, not just physically, above all physically, but then also on the court, the confidence, the assertiveness that he had suddenly with his new body and just having matured over time, made him go from just, some marginal prospect to becoming overnight a first round prospect for the NBA. He ended up being the MVP, in fact, of the European Under-18 Championships that summer. I talk about intangibles. Another crucial question, and this is regardless of level of competition, regardless of age, that I ask, that I ask when I see a player. I ask myself this, I ask other people, is does he like to play? Does he love to play? This may sound like a very simplistic question. It's like, okay, well, love to play. Sure, you must. It's not a given, It's easy to say that, if you love what you're doing, that you're going to be good at it. Sure is for me, I love my job. It's not a job for me, but believe it or not, for some players, I know that those of us who may not have had the luck to make a living playing a game, this may seem like blasphemy when you don't love what you do, but often, guys, yeah, they like it, but they don't love it. And if you don't play with that passion, you're going to be limiting yourself. So that's a question that I ask about a player, and when I'm just, like I said, I try to get it, when I see a player that just plays with a smile on his face, he always plays hard, it's a fair guess that he really likes playing that, above all, he's enjoying himself, and that he's going to give whatever he has when he's out on the court. He's going to give 100% all the time. When a player's older, a veteran player, you can understand that an older player who has a family, who's been playing for a long time, has family to support, maybe, he is playing now, it's a job for him, maybe he's playing for the money at that point in his life. That's understandable. But when you're 17, 18, this should be a game for you, It should be fun games for you. Hopefully you'll take it, be serious about it. But if you're not playing with enthusiasm and just loving and, understanding how lucky you are when you're 17, 18, that doesn't bode well, because the older you get, the more you're going to become cynical, the more it's going to become a job for you. And it's, like I said, when a guy loves to do something, he's more committed to it. He's going to work probably harder on his game in his free time. He's not going to just come in and, working on the clock, practices at 10, shows up at 9:59, practices over at noon, and he's out the door. A guy who loves to play, he's going to be there. He'll be the first guy in the gym. He'll be getting up extra shots before practice. He'll stay with the assistant coach after practice, probably. Maybe he'll work, on an off day. Some guys, like I said, there's a stereotype, which is sadly kind of true, that big guys don't love to play. It's not always the case. I know some big guys that love to play, but there are a lot of them that just play because that's kind of what is expected of them. When they were 15, to say, hey, you're 2'5", you should play basketball. Okay, then maybe they're successful at it, and they say, okay, yeah, this is not bad. I can make a living on it. But they just don't love to play. And that's going to affect their growth as players. They're never going to fulfill their potential. That's a fact. I've never seen a guy, like a lot of guys, they get by surely on physical talent or just natural talent. Maybe they're great shooters, but they don't love to play. They're never going to be as good as they could be. They still may be good enough to be pro players, but they're never going to be great. They're going to be difference makers. Some guys just love the lifestyle. They just love the lifestyle and the perks of being a pro athlete. Any coach, knows what I'm talking about. Guys that, they like to go, something they like to go out after with the team jersey and the team logo on, go to the clubs, pick up girls, they love the lifestyle, but they're not committed to the team, to winning. Like I said, these are things that, scouting is not just watching the game, it's also taking into consideration these intangible factors. I said scouting, is evaluating, projecting, predicting the future. It's not an exact science, I'm repeating myself, but I wanted to emphasize that. But scouting can also be seen as gathering information. What do I mean by gathering information? It's, gathering information, we call it intel on players. So, part of my job is watching and seeing players, but another part, kind of behind the scenes work, which ironically I spend just as much time on that as I do, going to games, is, creating a network and talking to people about the players that I'm scouting, that I'm interested in. Like I said, background, personal information on players is becoming more and more important, more and more crucial. Anybody who loves basketball and has an internet connection can watch games and streaming and probably do a good scouting report, but it's never going to be sufficient to make the appropriate decision if you don't know everything that's behind a player. It's a guy can be very physically skilled and talented, but if he's not a good guy, a nice guy, a good teammate, he's going to take away from your team. He's not going to add to your team. If a guy plays selfishly, cares more about his stats, or if he doesn't work hard, if he kind of brings his teammates down, or if he has personal problems, or if he drinks and parties, these are all things that are going to take away from the player's talent level and skill. And ultimately, signing a player who has bad intel is probably going to hurt your team more than it's going to help it. So creating a network, when I'm at games, when I'm at events like this clinic, if I'm not scouting or participating in the event, I'm talking to people, meeting with people, building a network, because you never know who's going to be able to give you some discriminating information that will help you make a decision on whether to sign a player or not. It's like I said, I write during the game, and then at halftime, if I'm up to par with my notes, I'm going to meet people, exchanging phone numbers, exchanging business cards. I always say that I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I hope that I've become one of the more established scouts, somebody that people would look up to and hold in high regard. I definitely have an advantage because of my experience over perhaps a younger, less experienced scout. I've taken more than one young scout under my wing over the years and tried to make them understand that, hey, you've got a great eye for talent. You're probably quicker than me at judging a player, but it's not enough. It's not enough. The behind the scenes work, getting the personal information, the background information on players is crucial, regardless of level of competition. Because, like I said, one bad apple, one bad seed can bring negative effects to a team at any level, in any sport. Even outside of sports, any group that has to interact and work together. If one guy has something negative about him, he's going to bring down others. So these are things that you really got to put importance into. You really got to spend a lot of time cultivating contacts, talking to people, talking to coaches, agents, trainers, PR guys, journalists, anybody that has had an interaction with a player that you're interested in, who may be able to give you a different perspective. There may be, everybody talks great about a player, but I'll find one guy who give you some negative stuff, I'll actually put a lot of value into that. It's not gonna say, oh, well, he said he's a bad guy, I won't sign him. But if I was convinced, okay, this kid is definitely, perfect for us, I will say, okay, wait, before we sign him though, let me do a little more digging. I thought that he was a sure thing, but let me check. I just need to double check because I have found some contradicting information. What do I look at? What are the questions I asked? First of all, knowing if the player's family background is fundamental, much more than you would think. I always ask questions. Sometimes I talk with, coaches and players from the team, and I don't even ask, is this guy, a good defender or a good shooter? I should already know that myself, first of all. But I need to know how he is as a person. If my team is gonna waste time, money, to go after this guy, to try to sign him, to, make a big offer, they deserve to know what they're getting into, So, family background, why is it so important? Well, because like I said, the values that a player's grown up as a person is gonna, like I said, it's gonna affect his, interaction with his teammates. Questions I ask, first of all, what do the parents do? If the parents are still together, fundamental question. It's, it's a stereotype, but, so many young men who grow up without a father in a single mom home, they're missing that male role model in their life. I'm very lucky. I grew up, with a traditional family, with two parents who never got divorced. They were together, for 50 years. And I had a great role model, my father. But, a lot of players don't have that. So it's crucial to know, if he grew up, with or without a significant father figure, positive male role model. If the dad wasn't in the picture, maybe was there somebody that filled in that spot or not? Maybe an uncle, maybe a mom remarried and the stepdad, was a great guy. Great, I need to know that. That is something that will factor in. What do the parents do? The parents, academics, was the mom a housewife? What do? Obviously, that background, the parents are academics, probably the kid was good in school. That's, stereotyping, but nonetheless, that's a positive factor. Maybe both parents were pro athletes. That's actually very, very common, not surprisingly, that, high-level athletes, they had at least one parent who was a high-level, athlete in some sport, maybe not necessarily even basketball, but, there's countless examples. It seems to me that, every high-level player I scout, it's some form of the dad was a pro basketball player and the mom was either a pro basketball or a pro volleyball player. I always joke that, the girls volleyball team often practiced before the men's basketball team, and that's how the parents, probably met them when they were younger. But, it's both genetics, because, sure, if both parents were athletes, the chance that the kid will be a good athlete too is higher than average. But parents that were pro athletes themselves, they probably have some good insights to give their children, to give their son or daughter, for that matter, on the pros and cons of being a professional athlete. So they have an understanding. They'll probably be supportive, probably, but not necessarily so. Sometimes the parents, regardless of their backgrounds, are going to actually have a negative influence. A thing I'm told often is that, the parents are together, they're not divorced, they're together, they're good people, but they're very money hungry. Maybe the dad lost his job, or maybe the parents, they see their son, daughter, whatever, they see them being pro athletes as kind of being, their money ticket for their future, being their pension fund. So they're going to try to manipulate and micromanage their kids, pro career, which in my experience is never a good thing. Meddling parent, they often may mean well, but it's very important for the parents to understand, and I know that this is something that may be discussed, by others later in the clinic, But from my experience, it is true. The parents have to learn to, let their kids be. Hopefully find somebody that both they and their kid trusts, that can advise them, be it an agent, be it the coach, that can give them good advice on where they should go forward for their career. But it's best though that the parents let other people, the parents should be supportive, but not be meddling. They should, like I said, find an agent they trust, have the coach kind of, maybe assist their son when he signs with an agent or goes to sign with a new team, but kind of, delegate this responsibility. I always ask coaches about the players' work and practice habits, because sure, I try to see players practice, but that's not always possible. Some teams don't let NBA scouts into practices. Sometimes, like I said, I go to one city, I see the game, and I leave the next day to go to my next destination. So I can only go see the game. It's not, I'm not always able to spend a couple days in the same town where I can see a game, but also practice. So I always ask, if the player's a hard worker or not. And sometimes they are, sometimes they are. Often coaches will tell me that, he's not a bad worker, Jason, but he's not a great worker either. Sometimes a young player, but not just a young player, even an older player, he'll work as hard as you make him. If you say be there at 10 and work for 2 hours, he'll work for 2 hours. He'll work hard too, but that's not enough. In my eyes, that's not enough. I want guys that are self-motivated. Guys that are going to go early to practice on their own. Guys that are going to stay after practice on their own. Guys that are going to ask the assistant coach to stay with him so he can get up extra shots, not the other way around, where the coach has to beg the player, hey, let's get some reps in. I want a player who, when a coach tells me that this kid, he goes to the gym, when the team has the day off, and this kid goes to the gym on his own, that's the type of player I'm looking for. A guy that is so committed to his game, that's, borderline obsessed with his craft. Those are the things that I look for. Those are the questions that I ask and that I need to have answered. Obviously something that I can see myself, but it's nice to hear this, from a coach, from other teammates, whether they consider that guy to be a good teammate or not. Whether he's selfish on the court, whether he's selfish off the court. I ask, is this player, is he more about scoring or about winning? Is he more interested in winning? Is he, or does he care about his stats more? When I interview players for the draft, I always ask them an example. Said, would you prefer to, score 20 points but not make the playoffs, or would you prefer being a reserve but being on a championship team? And the answer the player gives me is very significant. You'd be surprised at how many guys, I appreciate the honesty. It's not wrong to say I prefer to score 20 points a game. It means, you like to play, you're a competitor, but obviously, the guy that says it and says it meaning it, says that, I'm cool if I score only 10 points and come off the bench as long as the team is winning. Yeah, that's the type of guy that I want for my team. Mental toughness. What is mental toughness? I think there's that's a very ambiguous term. Mental toughness can be both literally mental and also physical toughness. By mental toughness, the questions I ask is, how does a player react under pressure? How does a player react to hard coaching, to being yelled at by his coach, to being criticized publicly? Does he get nervous? If the coach calls him out in practice and calls him a name, does he say, yeah, coach, you're right, I'm sorry, I'll try harder? Or is he the type of guy that, acts all oversensitive and says, oh, coach is always criticizing me, blah, blah, blah? Is he the type of guy that finds excuses? Well, so, it's not my fault, the big man, didn't help. These are things that, I may not be able to see myself, in the games, but I need to, have an idea of how a player's going to be if we bring him over to our team. Because once again, I may have the luxury of seeing a guy only a couple times live. And maybe I won't be sitting close to the court. So these are things that I really need to know. I may have had this impression myself already, but I asked, questions. So he seems like a good teammate. He seems to be the guy that congratulates a teammate or, comforts a teammate after a mistake. Knowing these things, sometimes I can see it myself. Sometimes I can't. When I can't, this is the type of questions that I ask, and I think that anybody should ask if they're planning to make a commitment, make an investment in a player. How does you react under pressure on the court? If you're down by 10 seconds left, would you trust this guy to make the shot? Would you call a play for him? That's huge. I mean, it's, like I said, maybe I've never had the opportunity to see this player in a close game. If a teammate says, I would trust, my life with this guy, if my life depended on a shot, I'd have him take it. That's that's a pretty big thing. If a coach says, nah, probably not, then I know, okay, maybe this guy's good enough, but I know he can't be the leader of our team. Another question that I always ask, is he a leader or a follower? Is he a leader or a follower? Is he the type of guy that's, when the team is struggling, is he the type of guy that's going to say, hey, come on, let's focus, work hard? Or is he the type of guy that's just going to go with the flow? Sure, if everybody's working hard and playing hard, he will too, but if everybody's slacking off, will he do the same? Those are things that you want to know, that you need to know. And leadership can be different forms. Is he a vocal leader, the type of guy that's going to say, hey, come on guys, stay in the game. He'll tell a teammate off, hey, come on, play harder. Or, say, hey, it's okay, man, you'll make the next shot. Or is he the guy that leads by example, which is not a bad thing either. It's not a bad thing. Sure, I prefer a guy who's vocal, but leading by example is good too. Just like I said, I've always, a lot of people told me this, and I totally agree with it. If your best player is your hardest worker, your team is going to be pretty good. As a coach, that's probably one of the best things that you can ask for. Knowing that your best player is also your hardest worker is huge, because more often than not, in the dynamics of a team, the top player, the leader, the guy that everybody else looks up to, he's going to be, the one. If he's working hard, everybody's going to work hard too, day in, day out. That's crucial. That's crucial for winning, in my opinion. Off-court issues, huge. More and more it's, does a guy have personal problems, family problems? If he's, like I said, if he's a young kid, maybe he's the meal ticket for his whole family. A lot of kids, especially in Eastern Europe, the parents raise their kids hoping they'll be pro athletes, whether it's basketball or volleyball or football is secondary, because that's more often than not the best way, for the family. It's a lot of, unjust pressure on the kid, but, it's like I said, will the kid have the added responsibility of knowing that he's going to be the breadwinner at age 18 for his whole family? Maybe he has 3 brothers and sisters too. These are crucial things to know about a player. Have an idea what other interests are. His hobbies. Most 18-year-old kids, the coach says Jason is a typical 17, 18-year-old. He likes to play video games in free time. He likes girls. Okay, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But ironically, the more interest in hobbies a guy has, that may not necessarily be a good thing. I know that's kind of contradictory. And it's not a negative per se. I would have, red flag a guy, they say that he has lots of interests, you know, and he likes to read. Sure, that's not a bad thing. But often kind of the mentality, if you want to succeed at something at a high level, you have to be obsessed with that. You know, that's why, you know, I put so much value into finding out if a guy works hard on his own before and after practice, if he works on off days, because that means that he's very committed. That means that he's obsessed in a good way, obsessed with what he's doing, that he's so driven to succeed that he really doesn't care about anything else, that he's putting all his eggs in one basket, which in life may not necessarily a good thing, but in this specific aspect of succeeding at, you know, professional sport is probably not a bad thing. So like I said, these are, you know, things that I want to know. It's always, you know, I always ask questions about a player's academic past. You know, by the time, you know, they're ready to sign a pro contract, they probably already finished school. But it's interesting and useful, in my opinion, to know if a player, you know, was a good student or not. You know, if he went to a real school, or if he just went to one of those online, just got his high school diploma on an online course, and went, you know, private school, and, you know, it says a lot about, you know, a person. I always ask, very important, you know, how is his English, regardless of what nationality he may be, because as we all know, like I said, there are people from different nationalities, and I guess we all speak English, if not we wouldn't be here. Basketball, you know, English is kind of the universal language of basketball, so that's a fundamental question. You know, sometimes a coach or somebody from a team will say, oh yeah, he speaks English. And then, you know, I have the opportunity to interview the player, and, you know, poor kid, you know, he doesn't speak very good English, or he may understand, you know, rap songs, but when you're drilling him in practice during a timeout, the coach is saying something quickly, okay, screen left, right, do this and that, and you're speaking really quick, the kid may not pick up everything. So, I mean, that's, you know, something, you know, smart agents, and if they have a young prospect who's a high-level player, be it for NBA or even just EuroLeague, have them, you know, tutored in English, pay for private lessons, because it's going to help them, you know, if they transfer to another country. It's crucial, both on and off the court. It's something to not underestimate. In my experience, usually guys that, you know, who are good in school also speak good English. It's not always, you know, a given, but more often than not, there's a correlation between the two. Young kid, is he still living with his family? Is he living alone? You know, who cooks for him? If he lives with another teammate? Having a steady girlfriend, that's an underestimated factor. Usually guys that have steady girlfriends are probably less inclined to go out and party, because they, you know, like I said, maybe their girlfriend's a good influence on them, you know, they'll kind of keep them, you know, in check. Whereas guys that, you know, go from girl to girl, that means they're probably going to be going out and partying. You know, it's, like I said, sure, guys that are young especially, it's normal for them to want to go out and, you know, enjoy their freedom, but there's a limit to that, you know. It's, if a guy likes, you know, if a guy's horny and he wants to have girls, I get it. But if he goes out every freaking night, including the day before a game, that's a problem. Goes out and has a couple beers after a win, I'm all for it. In fact, I tell my players, you know, to go relax. They deserve it, you know, after a long week of practice and preparation for the game, go celebrate. But if I find out my player is going out the day before a game, I don't care if, you know, you didn't drink. You should just be at home, focusing, watching wrestling, watching a movie, relaxing, but saving your energy. And, you know, this catches up. You know, when guys are young, they feel that they're invincible. And, hey, as long as they show up to practice the next morning and play hard and don't look like they were out all night and, you know, don't act like they drank too much, that's good, but it's going to catch up with them. That's what a lot of people don't understand. The players above all, but even those around them say, well, hey, I know he goes out, but hey, he works hard in practice, what more can I want? But it's going to catch up with him. You know, it's going to affect the players, you know, body sooner or later, sooner than they think. You know, those late nights are going to start taking a toll. So That's, you know, taking care of yourself. That's something that I can't see on the court myself. That's something I need to find out. And I want to know if, you know, a player takes good care of his body. Like I said, obviously if he's a partier or a drinker or not, if he's the type of guy that, you know, goes out at night a lot, but just take care of your body, nutrition, diet, you know, it's, especially young guys. You know, these young guys, you know, if they had their mom that was cooking for them, first time they're independent, they don't know how to eat. They go get fast food, they go out with their friends, and, you know, they have money for the first time, so they're eating, you know, a lot late in the evening. Guys, young guys especially need to be educated. Actually, not just young guys. There are a lot of, you know, in the NBA, most teams now, this is a recent development, but probably the last 10 years or so, most teams have a full-time dietitian that is available to the players. You know, more and more teams are having meals prepared after practice directly at the practice facility. More and more teams are building literally full functioning kitchens inside the practice facilities, and they have a full-time nutritionist and cook, or at least a catering service, high-quality catering service, because they prefer to give the players the meal themselves, because, you know, some guys, they're just going to leave practice, go eat fast food, go eat pizza. Like I said, players need to be educated, you know, about this. And these are things, though, that, you know, I as a scout, I want to know. And sometimes I can see it, you know, if a player's overweight, you know, especially a big guy, it's like, wait, you know, is this guy overweight just because, you know, he still needs to shed his baby fat because he's a late bloomer? Or is his diet really bad? More often than not, you know, his diet will be bad. You know, Marc Gasol comes to mind. You know, Marc Gasol's turned out to be one of the top centers in the NBA, in the world for that matter. But when he was younger, he was visibly overweight. A sharp contrast to his brother Poe, who was so long and skinny. But you could see that he did share the same basketball talent and feel. He had great hands and could shoot the ball, could pass it, but, you know, physically he was the opposite of his brother. And in fact, that affected his draft status. He was taken in the second round because he was overweight all the time, you know. The team that he was drafted, okay, we'll take him in the second round because he's, you know, Poe Gasol's brother, he's got good genes. But it was not a sure thing. If not, it would have been taken in the first round. But, you know, when he got older, you know, he finally, you know, started to change his diet. And like I said, overnight, he went from being this chubby, overweight kid to being, you know, a more athletic, big guy, and, you know, has ended up having a great career. But that was not a given. You know, he had to really work on his body, really change his body. So, you know, diet, nutrition is a fundamental thing to look at when inquiring about a big player. And, you know, sure, NBA teams have the funds to have a dietitian, but like I said, even if I had a youth team, you know, I would hope that my coach is the type of guy that would be, you know, like a big brother to his guys and try to encourage them to eat better, you know, invite kids over to his house to have a good home-cooked meal, because, you know, these things do make a difference in the long run. Generally speaking, you know, how can scouting help, you know, a team in the long term, regardless of the level of play? And I know that I've been spoiled because I've worked for NBA teams that have unlimited funds to pour into this, but even at a lower level, some form of scouting, maybe even just scouting your own domestic league fully. You know, I'm not saying you have to scout internationally, but scouting in one form or the other can be helpful both short and long term. It's very important to be able to create a database. The ultimate goal for me when I was working for an NBA team was to be able to build a database, you know, for my team, because knowing all the players and your potential player market, you know, even if you know, you're a team from Estonia, a junior team, you should know at least all the players, domestic players, and maybe the American players, mid-level American players, you know, guys from the G League, not from the NBA perhaps, but from the G League, for instance. Because being able to build over time a database is going to bring so many advantages to a team. It's going to help management, like I said, make decisions. You know, it's going to help coaches understand the type of players they're getting better. It's going to help even coaches understand opponents. Even a guy that you scout and never sign, just the fact that you did your research and did your homework on him is going to help you coaching against him. Because you're going to know things about that player that weren't so obvious, you know, just by watching him on video when you were preparing the game. If you know that that guy doesn't react well under pressure, doesn't react well to physical play, you're going to make sure that you tell your defender to be really aggressive and to try to, you know, get physical with them, try to make him nervous. You know, these are small details, but these are small details that can make a difference. Talking about, you know, creating a database, just being able to access, you know, this information, you know, on a whim. It's, like I said, it's going to provide long-term advantages. I always joke semi-seriously that, you know, I worked for 3 different NBA teams, and, you know, I saw a lot of games with a lot of game reports on a lot of players, and I got a lot of intel work, you know, background information on said players. And even though I'm not working for said teams anymore, I know for a fact, because I've been told so, that these teams are still reaping the benefits from this. You know, I joke all the time that, you know, Portland, Detroit, Miami, they should give you some form of like royalties because they're still, you know, taking advantage of the information that I procured them, you know, several years ago. My point being that, you know, this information, you know, putting the effort, you know, to do scouting in advance, you know, over the summer, going to tournaments, whether it's you have a professional scout or whether it's one of your coaches, your junior team coach going to see summer tournaments, looking at the young players to invest on. This is a huge, huge factor that's going to help, you know, your team in the long run. How many times do you need to see a player? There's no answer to that, it's subjective. You know, I ideally want to see a guy 4 or 5 times live. I do compliment what I do watching players also on video. My personal thing, everybody's different. I need to see the guy at least once, you know, as a starter. I need to see a guy live at least once as a starter. After that, if I have seen him live, and I have a good idea of his body type from after seeing him up close, and you know, have a good idea of his strengths and weaknesses. Then, if I do watch a video, that can substitute, it's not a perfect substitute, but it can substitute a live game, provided I have at least a good feel for him and I've seen him live at least once. In an ideal world, I'd be able to see as many games as I wanted of any player. That's not always possible because of, you know, budgetary reasons. NBA teams do, you know, have some budget restraints, or at least, you know, the scouting department does. But like I said, you know, seeing a player on video can complement, can help. I always say this, that always try to see a player as much as possible, gather as much information as you can, obviously, but there's also the opposite can happen, that you actually see a player too many times, and that is where you have what I call over-scouting. By over-scouting, I mean that sometimes when you see a player so many times, you end up focusing too much on his negatives. Because, you know, sure, initially you want a reason to go see that guy again. So you look at him and say, okay, this guy's got great size, he's a good athlete, he's very skilled, he's got great hands, he's definitely a player of interest for my team. Should we go see him again and again? But after a while, now that you know him well, you know all his strengths, you know he's got a special skill, but you're gonna start drawing more on his, you know, defects. Yeah, well, damn, but he's, you know, he's not a great pick and roll defender, or he's just, you know, just keep you're gonna start dwelling too much on the negatives, and it's okay to change your mind, but sometimes, you can't flip-flop totally on a guy that you really liked. Perfect example for me was Thiago Splitter. Thiago Splitter was playing in the EuroLeague at age 15, age 16 for Talmutaria, and he was a huge NBA prospect from the start. Guy, that big, long kid who was a good runner, good athlete, that young, playing the EuroLeague was obviously a major attraction for many years. Going to Vitoria, Spain was never one of my favorite road trips. Nothing against the city, very nice city, but it was very hard to get to. Very hard to get to, small airport, usually have to fly into Bilbao, rent a car. Never an easy trip, but for many years I had to go to Vitoria to see Thiago Splitter. And like I said, I liked him. He was definitely an NBA prospect, but after 5 years, because I'd been scouting him since he was, even before he was eligible to put his name in, since he was 15, 16 years old. So by the time he was 22, when he finally did stay in the NBA draft, a lot of people, including myself, were down on him. They were like, yeah, I mean, late first round, maybe late first round, early second, yeah, I'd consider him, but no way, 5 years before everybody said, oh, it's going to be a lottery pick. Everybody was down on him, at least I was. In the end, though, he turned out that he had a very good career. He had a very fulfilling career with Vitoria, and then he went on to play in the NBA for several years before, injury problems took a toll, forced him into early retirement. But it turned out, though, that his strengths, which are the original reason that, scouts like myself were so into him, were really the thing that counted. We started to underestimate his skills, just focusing on his defects. And it turns out, though, that those skills translated very well to the NBA. He was probably more effective, as an NBA player than he was in Europe. Even though he had some very good years in Talmutaria, his NBA career, was quite good. My point being, never, like I said, if a guy has special skills, do not, forget about them. It's like I said, overscouting can be dangerous. It's okay to change your mind, but sometimes don't change it too much. In my experience, there are a lot of guys that I liked, but later, especially with young players, I changed my mind about. And that's, like I said, sometimes it's inevitable. I see a guy when he's 17, he's physically stronger than everybody else. So, I may overrate him mistakenly myself. Then maybe after a year or two, I'll kind of change my perspective and say, okay, he's a good player, but I don't know if he's as good as I originally thought. And then there are guys that I don't like, but they turn out to be, much better than I originally thought. More often than not, if I don't like a player, I'm not saying that I'll be right about him, but my opinion on him won't change that much. But I can, just as I thought Batum was going to be a better NBA player than he was a European player, and I was right about that, I was wrong, dead wrong on a couple other guys who went on to have very successful careers, both internationally and in the NBA. Name that comes to mind, Dragic. I didn't think he was very good. I never liked him. Not a good shooter, tunnel vision, straight line driver. I said, this guy, yeah, he's good in Europe because he's a good athlete, he's a great slasher, sure, but he's not a good shooter. He can't play in the NBA. I was wrong. He's a starter for Miami. He was a starter in Phoenix. He's had a very good NBA career. He was the MVP of Eurobasket last year. Ricky Rubio. I said, can't shoot. He's struggling in Barcelona. Ask Charlie Pasquale about Ricky Rubio. He had to take him out in the fourth quarters of early games because his lack of shooting was such a liability, among other things. Sure, he was a great defender. Sure, he was a creative passer, but he had some limitations. He goes to the NBA. He's still not shooting it well. He's improved, but he's playing very well. He's a starter for a good Utah team. Like I said, I was never a fan. I was wrong. You know, I said I focused too much on his weaknesses, and I did not project how in a more open court style like the NBA, where shooting was not as crucial because teams played fast, at least in the regular season they did, that his flaws would be hidden, and he was a good enough defender. Whereas in Europe, you know, playing for Barcelona, a EuroLeague team, slow-paced, deliberate style, that was not good for his style of play. So I was wrong about Ricky Rubio. I thought he would be a mediocre NBA player. It's turned out to be a better NBA player than I thought. You know, so you never know. It's not an exact science. It's something that, you know, I always stress that it's not an exact science, but the more information you gather on a player, whether it's, you know, scouting in the form of scouting reports or intel reports, the better the chance of making a right decision you're going to have. Another question you ask is, you know, when I scout a player, is he the right culture? Culture is a very broad term, I realize, but, you know, is he the right culture for your team, for your community, for your market? In Portland, when I first got to Portland was, you know, the Trailblazers were dubbed the jail Blazers because they had a good team, they had many talented players, but well-noted, you know, incidents of players getting into trouble off the court, guys that were partying late, guys that, you know, got into fistfights in bars, guys that got caught carrying concealed weapons, guys that had wild parties with naked girls walking out, you know, on the sidewalk at 3 o'clock in the morning. And Portland, Oregon, small town, I believe still the smallest NBA market. It was a problem beyond basketball. When I joined Portland, the assistant general manager, who became general manager, Kevin Pritchard, he was given pretty much the mandate by the owner, the late Paul Allen, to clean house and change the culture. Obviously, this was not a hard sell for Kevin Pritchard, who came, you know, from a great basketball program in Kansas, coached by Larry Brown and Coach Williams from the University of North Carolina. But obviously, it was not easy to get, you know, to change the culture and to change the players too. But it took a couple years, but, you know, we managed to get rid of, you know, trade for draft picks. You know, some of the players that, even though they were talented and very skilled, they were just not the type of players that, you know, were appropriate for creating a winning atmosphere. How does this affect me as a scout? I didn't have to, free agency, you know, was not my thing. But as scouts, we were, like I said, given the mandate to focus only on players that were good guys. You know, all the intel that I talked about, I know we had to be very, very thorough. Whether it was a college guy or a European guy, if it was a guy that we were going to draft, a young player, we had to be sure that he was a good guy. So, you know, I would talk to as many sources as possible about a player. All my colleagues that were doing the college would do the same, because we needed, I said, we wanted good players, yes, but we needed good people too, because we just couldn't risk creating the negative atmosphere, the negative culture that was in Portland when, you know, we all arrived there. So like I said, you know, we would automatically red flag, you know, we would like a player, but then once we started getting bad intel from multiple sources, the same guy that we were really high on, he was off our list. It wasn't even like we would not consider signing him. And that even went for free agents for that matter. You know, we did our homework, you know, like I said, you know, one player, Marco Jaric, I knew personally, and, you know, I've always liked as a player. We were considering signing him, but we were reluctant to sign him. Not that he's a bad guy, but he was playing for the LA Clippers at the time, and he was famous, or infamous for his partying lifestyle, and you know, he was a legendary Playboy ladies man, and we were afraid that in a small conservative community like Portland, Oregon, that would not, you know, be a good mix, good fit. What worked in LA, big city, where anything goes, where people didn't care if you went out every night with a different, you know, Playboy model or something, they couldn't care less. In fact, that probably made you more popular. In a small town like Portland, Oregon, that was actually going to create a negative distraction. So we thought about it, and it wasn't the only reason, but it was a reason in us to say, do not sign Marco Yarich. I was a little disappointed because, you know, he played in Bologna, my hometown, so I knew him personally, and I was hoping he would sign it, but I understood, you know, that our criteria was, you know, then, just to make an example, after several years in Portland, when we did effectively change the culture, the mentality, you know, we kind of got to the point where we said, okay, now we've changed the culture, we've got all good guys, but maybe we're too nice for our own good. We're going to need a little more toughness to the team. So, you know, we became a little more flexible, you know, and, you know, for guy, our kind of rationale is that we have enough high character guys where that if we draft or sign players who are maybe not perfect, you know, that there'll be enough good examples on a team to, you know, kind of keep them in line. So, you know, I remember we had a team psychologist even that, you know, anybody we signed or were going to sign would have to interview with the team psychologist first, and even her criteria changed, you know. After a while, we said, okay, unless you think this guy is a serial killer, it's okay to sign him. So, you know, that's something that's, these small things, you know, once again, not everybody has, you know, the ability to do this type of research, to have a psychologist, but I'm just saying, the more research, the more time put into learning about a player, the better decisions you're gonna make. And like I said, if I had to invest a lot of money to sign a player, you know, I would want to know as much as I can about him. So that's, people ask me a lot about, you know, what makes a good scout. Is playing a necessity? I don't think it is, in the sense that I played basketball, but never at a pro level. I know a lot of, you know, NBA managers, NBA scouts, NBA coaches who were not high-level players, and have been very successful. Just like I know a lot of, you know, former high-level pro players that were unsuccessful at coaches and don't have a very good eye for talent. I find that, you know, it's interesting, you know, to compare notes, you know, with other scouts on players, both scouts from your own team and on other teams, because somebody's always going to give you, you know, a different point of view, often depending on their own personal backgrounds. Like I said, I play basketball at a low level. I like basketball, but, you know, I was never a high-level player. I worked as a journalist, as an agent, so I never thought I'd be necessarily a pro scout when I was younger, but I liked the idea of working in pro basketball. So what I brought to the table when I first started scouting was just a general knowledge of basketball, of high-level basketball, because I worked as an agent, I had worked as a journalist covering the local EuroLeague teams in Bologna, Italy. So I knew the player market quite well. I probably didn't know the players as well as a scout would have to, but I knew them well enough to know who the top players were. And like I said, I learned, you know, over time on what I needed to focus on as a scout. But it's interesting to compare, like when I scout with other people who have a coaching background, you know, they point out things that I probably wouldn't notice or don't notice automatically like I do. Usually a scout has the background of a coach. His scouting reports are extremely detailed, way more detailed than mine, which are pretty long themselves, but extremely detailed. When they notice things, you know, that I don't know this, but a coach would. Former players, you know, their scouting reports are typically very short. I know it's a stereotype, but very short. That doesn't mean though that they don't know what they're doing and that they don't work hard. They have an advantage that sometimes, you know, they just, having played at a high level, they recognize certain characteristics in players. And, you know, something that, unless you've played at a high level, you may not notice yourself. So that's something that's very, that's another way to look at things. You know, just having different, you know, people from different backgrounds, kind of giving their own different perspective is another way, you know, to get a well-rounded 360-degree perspective on a player. So, yeah. Any questions?
No. Just quickly, I have received 4 or 5 different calls about one Estonian player, Trell, and from NBA Scouts, and this is what he told about off-court stuff. All the interviews what NBA Scouts are making with me about Trell, 90% of the questions are off-court stuff. So for you coaches, it's very important to teach your players not only fundamentals, but everything else also.
Yeah.
Like body language, all kind of stuff like this. So just one main point.
Yeah, I think that, you know, especially about Europe, you know, sure, like I said, if you don't have the budget of an NBA team, which most don't, this added burden of trying to educate the players and, you know, give them the right mentality falls on the coaches more than on anybody else. So I guess you can add that to the job description, you know, of a coach. You know, to be a good coach, you also have to be, you know, a good psychologist, perhaps. You know, Coach Bergman yesterday, you know, was talking about the psychology of, you know, coaching at high levels. That's just another aspect. The coach really, you know, has to, you know, be in tune, you know, with his players. And he also, like I said, you know, do multiple things, and including, but not limited to, you know, just helping the right men, getting the right mentality across.
Okay, thanks a lot. We are again down, still down, sorry. And so let's make it only 10 minutes break, coffee break. 10 minutes.